One of the most popular product strategy questions are product improvement questions, which ask you how you'd improve a product. Sometimes they'll even ask you to improve their own product. And in that moment, you're probably thinking, how am I supposed to beat the people who built this product? And that's the catch. Interviewers are not using your response to this question to shape their next roadmap. I think. They simply want to see if you can take an ambiguous problem, break it down like a product manager, and propose a recommendation that will meaningfully move the business forward. And today, I'll show you how to do just that. Hey, I'm Rachel, a product manager in Big Tech. Today, I'm covering one of the most popular product strategy questions in the product strategy series, which is the product improvement question. In this video, I skip all the common advice and explain what product improvement questions are, the framework to answer them, and walk through a concrete solution to tie it all together. Let's get started. First, let's cover what product improvement questions are. These are strategy plan questions that ask you to identify the highest impact way to improve an existing product by aligning user needs, business goals, and market realities to finally recommend a clear strategic plan. Some examples include, how would you improve Instagram Reels? How would you improve Spotify using social features? How would you 5x Amazon Prime's revenue? How would you improve YouTube's recommendation algorithm? Candidates typically make two key mistakes here when answering the product improvement question. The first one is confusing the product improvement question with product design questions, which ask you to design a new feature or product for a specific user group. Instead, your answer to product improvement questions should be a strategic plan that will meaningfully move the business forward. For example, if you were asked the product design question, how would you improve Uber for frequent riders? You might suggest building a subscription service to make repeat trips faster and easier. But if you were asked the product improvement question, how would you improve Uber? Your solution may be recommending a strategic shift to reposition Uber from an on-demand ride service to a platform centered around predictable, recurring transportation for all users in order to build long-term customer retention and lifetime value. The second key mistake candidates make is tying their recommendation too closely to trends in the market. Strong answers use trends to support a strategy, not blindly follow it. Using the same Uber example, a weak answer would be claiming that everyone is investing in autonomous vehicles right now, so Uber should invest more on AVs as well, without considering whether it actually makes sense for Uber's customers, business models, and competitive positioning. With that in mind, let's walk through how we can answer product improvement questions using a very popular example. How would you improve Slack? Quick pause here. For the sake of this walkthrough, we'll go step by step through the entire framework, including all the context you need to consider to recommend a solution at the end. But when actually answering the question in an interview, you should focus only on the context that is most relevant to your question. Okay, back to the solution. To answer this question, I'll use a simple 3-step framework that we've been using to answer all product strategy questions. First, we ask clarifying questions. Then we analyze the context, which includes company positioning, customer and their pain points, competitive landscape, and market forces. And finally, using that context, we recommend a strategic plan to meaningfully move the business forward. First, we want to align on what the product is, what success means, and any constraints. First, what is Slack? As a quick refresher, Slack is a very popular workplace communication platform designed to help teams coordinate work, align decisions, and move faster together. Think of it as a more professional messaging platform for your coworkers, but with more organized structure like channels and threads, and also personalized emojis. Next, we want to ask if there is a goal in mind. Are we optimizing for long-term retention, expansion within enterprises, deeper daily dependence on Slack, or is there no particular goal in mind? And finally, are there any constraints around security, compliance, admin control, or user trust that would limit how aggressively we can pursue product changes? Let's assume for this example, the interviewer gives me flexibility on what success means for Slack, and there are no limitations to scope nor constraints. Product strategy questions are meant to be open-ended, so it's likely that the interviewer doesn't give you much direction here. To figure out what to actually improve for Slack, we'll move on to the next step, which is to analyze the context of this question, which includes the company positioning, customers and their pain points, competitive landscape, and market forces. First, let's start with company positioning. We'll cover Slack's mission and strategy, its business model and revenue drivers, and its core strengths and weaknesses. With this context, we can then make an informed judgment about what Slack is likely trying to do next. Slack's mission is to make work life simpler, more pleasant, and more productive. At its core, Slack positions itself as a place where work coordination happens, helping teams communicate, align, and move faster together. Slack operates a B2B SaaS seat-based subscription model where revenue scales with the number of active users and the depth of adoption within an organization. While Slack offers a free tier to drive bottom-up adoption, the majority of the revenue comes from paid enterprise plans that unlock advanced features like security, compliance, admin controls, and integrations. This means Slack's revenue lever is not driven by raw message volume, but by how deeply embedded it becomes in an organization's daily workflows. Now let's move on to Slack's strengths. One of Slack's biggest advantages is its ecosystem integration. By connecting deeply with other tools, Slack becomes the default hub for cross-functional alignment. As these workflows embed into daily operations, the product becomes more indispensable and naturally turns into the first app users open every day. Another major strength is the high switching cost for customers, especially at scale. As teams grow and accumulate channels, workflows, and shared histories, Slack becomes deeply embedded in how work gets done, making it difficult to replace. On a similar note, Slack sits on a massive volume of organizational data. Because it's used by so many enterprise customers, Slack can capture rich signals about how work happens, which they can then use to innovate on. And lastly, Slack has also earned strong enterprise trust. Its security, compliance, and admin controls make it a viable option for large and highly regulated organizations. With that being said though, Slack's moat is strongest in human-to-human coordination. As coordination increasingly shifts from people to systems and automated workflows, this advantage becomes more fragile. And that brings us to Slack's first core weakness. Additionally, Slack is excellent at generating conversations, but much weaker at ensuring decisions are made and work actually gets done. There's activity, but not always progress. Over time, this creates another issue: poor long-term memory. Critical context and decisions live inside chat history, but are difficult to extract, resurface, or reference later. As a result, institutional knowledge disappears quickly. Next, Slack has limited intent awareness. The system treats most messages the same, even though some require action, some require acknowledgement, and some are purely informational. It does not distinguish which messages need a follow-up. And lastly, as organizations scale, this gap compounds. Message volume increases, channels and threads multiply, ownership becomes less clear, and notification overload becomes inevitable. What works for a 10-person team often breaks down in a 10,000-person company, creating coordination friction that Slack alone does not resolve. And all these challenges point directly to Slack's long-term mission. Slack's opportunity is to evolve from a communication tool into the system teams rely on to coordinate and complete work. Because in an enterprise-driven revenue model, value and long-term growth increases as a product becomes deeply embedded in core workflows. People are already using Slack, but it becomes significantly harder to replace when it plays a central role in planning, decision-making, and execution instead of just facilitating conversation. But to understand whether Slack can realistically move in that direction, we need to shift from the company lens to the customer lens by answering the following questions. First, who are the customers? And also, what are their pain points? And lastly, what challenges do the customers still face? First, who are Slack's customers? Slack primarily serves two customer groups. First, individual contributors who rely on Slack for day-to-day coordination, and second, leaders like engineering managers or directors who are responsible for alignment, execution, and visibility across teams. Next, what are their pain points? For individual contributors, the biggest challenge is fragmentation. Work is scattered across chats, meetings, emails, and multiple tools, forcing constant context switching. Additionally, information overload is a big issue. Important requests and decisions often get buried in busy channels and long threads, leaving individuals to manually determine what actually requires attention. And lastly, default retention for Slack messages is only 30 days, meaning context disappears. Catching up after a long time away or learning about new features become difficult because key decisions live inside unstructured message history. Now let's look at the leader's customer group. Leaders struggle with limited visibility into what work is in progress, what is blocked, and what is completed. As organizations grow, coordination overhead increases. It becomes harder to identify priorities, risks, and cross-team dependencies across dozens of channels. And what challenges do the customers still face? As you can see, for both individual contributors and leaders, the real issue isn't a lack of communication. The challenge that still remains is a lack of shared clarity around priorities, decisions, ownership, and what still needs to be done. Although Slack has introduced features like AI-powered channel recaps, workflow builder, and huddles to reduce coordination friction, conversations still fail to consistently translate into clear decisions. This directly reinforces the opportunity we outlined earlier, for Slack to evolve from a communication tool into the system teams rely on to coordinate and complete work. But Slack is not the only company trying to solve this problem. To understand whether Slack can realistically make this shift, we now need to examine the competitive landscape. In this section, we'll capture who the existing competitors are, what the product alternatives are, market trends that can reshape the space, and shifts in user behavior that could influence adoption, retention, and long-term relevance. First, let's look at Slack's direct competitors. These are platforms that compete head-to-head as a primary messaging hub inside organizations. The most prominent examples are Microsoft Teams and Google Chat. Both bundle communication into broader productivity ecosystems. For example, in Google Chat, you can directly reference docs, sheets, or Drive files in a conversation, comment inline, and see live updates without leaving the thread. However, while there are only a handful of chat platforms operating at Slack scale, Slack's real competitive pressure doesn't just come from other messaging platforms. It comes from new approaches that reduce the need for chat altogether, which brings us to talking about Slack's alternatives. Instead of competing as messaging platforms, these tools compete by solving coordination differently. First, we have task management platforms, including tools like Asana, Jira, ClickUp, and Linear. These products organize work around structured tasks, clear owners, and define workflows. Instead of coordinating through conversation, teams align through shared plans and tracked execution. Additionally, there are AI meeting assistants such as Supernormal, Firefly's AI, and Otter AI. These tools listen to meetings automatically, generate summaries, tasks, and follow-ups, reducing the need for manual note-taking and recap messages. Next, there are knowledge management platforms, including Haystack AI and Lexion. These systems connect documents, tickets, and emails to preserve context and make decisions easier to find later on. You'll notice that many of these alternatives look really different on the surface, but they're all moving towards the same direction. Teams are moving away from coordinating through open-ended conversation and towards systems that structure, track, and automate execution. This pattern mirrors a broader market trend towards greater automation, clearer ownership, and more structured coordination across organizations. With that being said, let's talk about the market trends that can change Slack's competitive landscape. The biggest shift is AI moving value up the stack, from simply enabling communication to synthesizing information and driving action. Instead of just summarizing conversations, AI is beginning to orchestrate work across systems. For example, Microsoft Copilot can extract tasks from meetings, follow up on unresolved email threads, and link documents to related work without manual input from a user. In contrast, Slack AI today is largely focused on summarizing conversations and helping users retrieve information within chat. It makes decisions easier to navigate, but it does not yet take meaningful action across tools or actually move work forward. Another major shift is companies consolidating around a single productivity suite, such as Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace. Instead of stitching together separate tools, organizations are choosing ecosystems where chat, email, documents, meetings, and tasks are already integrated. For example, Google Workspace can summarize a document, extract action items from a meeting, and draft follow-ups in Gmail with the same system. And lastly, there has been a broader shift towards asynchronous work. Tools like Linear, Notion, and GitHub Issues prioritize clarity through structured documentation over constant real-time messaging. This allows work to progress without everyone needing to be online at the same time, which is especially valuable for larger organizations operating across multiple time zones and locations. And as market trends evolve, so does user behavior. One user trend is that we're seeing individual contributors mute channels more, reduce notifications, and disengage from high-volume conversations due to cognitive overload. There's also a growing culture around personal productivity, where people take pride in deep work and focus rather than constant responsiveness. But beyond competitors and market trends, we also need to look at the forces shaping Slack's position in the market. This includes the bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of buyers, and threat of new entrants. First, we'll look at the bargaining power of suppliers, which reflects how much influence suppliers have over pricing, costs, and how the business operates. In Slack's case, one of their suppliers are the software platforms it integrates with. Slack depends on these systems to deliver end-to-end value. If those platforms restrict access, limit integrations, or prioritize their own native messaging features, Slack becomes less valuable. We've seen this happen before. Google Meet didn't need to block Zoom to reduce its advantage. By embedding Google Meet directly into Gmail and bundling it into Google Workspace at no additional cost, Google made its own video product the default for millions of existing users. Bundling shifted user behavior without eliminating competitors outright. Next, let's move on to the bargaining power of buyers, which reflects how easily customers can switch options and how much influence they have over pricing and demand. Even with limited direct competitors at scale, buyers still have leverage because Slack is evaluated against broader productivity suites with more built-in functionality. When task management, documents, meetings, and execution workflows are already integrated into Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, Slack can feel duplicative rather than essential. That creates room for procurement to negotiate pricing or default to bundled options like Google Chat that are already included in enterprise agreements. Once again, we've seen this happen before. Dropbox was previously very popular and widely adopted, but once collaboration and approvals moved directly into Google Docs and Microsoft Office, companies began questioning the need to purchase a separate file sharing product. And lastly, we have the threat of new entrants, which examines how new competitors could reshape the market. While it's difficult for a new company to compete with Slack at enterprise scale, the greater risk may not be a direct replacement. It may come from AI native tools and workarounds that reduce the need for chat altogether, as discussed in the alternative section. As more coordination happens through automated workflows and agents rather than back and forth messaging, chat becomes less important. While this shift may take some time, significant investment is already flowing into AI-driven orchestration and agentic workflows, making it a credible long-term threat to Slack. Great, so with all this context analyzed, we're finally ready to recommend a strategic plan to improve Slack. This section, we will present the strategic plan we're recommending, why this plan makes sense given the context that we just analyzed, and then any risks or challenges you're accepting and how you'd mitigate them. And finally, how you'd execute this plan. First off, Slack should evolve from a conversation hub to the system that actively drives work to completion. Instead of optimizing for better communication, Slack should optimize for organizational clarity and follow-through, making itself accountable for whether work actually gets done. Slack should do this by building a memorization layer that continuously captures decisions, context, and commitments so knowledge compounds instead of disappearing into chat history. Over time, it should infer when commitments are fulfilled and give both individual contributors and leaders clear visibility into progress without adding more noise to their day-to-day. And why does this direction make sense? This is because communication is no longer scarce. Clarity is. First, Slack's risk isn't just competition from other chat tools. It's losing relevance as coordination and execution move elsewhere. When conversations don't translate into ownership or outcomes, teams shift decisions to docs, execution to Jira, and urgency to meetings. Slack may retain users, but it's becoming less essential over time. Additionally, in enterprise software, retention is driven by dependency, not message volume. Customers renew when a product is critical to getting work done. And of course, every recommendation comes with its trade-offs. First, users may feel over-surveyed or judged if their commitments are automatically tracked. And secondly, if implemented poorly, this could actually increase cognitive load instead of reducing it, as more automation can quickly become overwhelming. To mitigate this, Slack must prioritize transparency and control. Users should clearly understand what is being captured and have the ability to edit, confirm, or opt out. And finally, how would you act on this plan? First, we need to redefine Slack's success metrics, shift from engagement and message volume to time to clarity and time to resolution instead. Then, Slack should sequence the build carefully. Start by creating a reliable memorization layer that captures decisions, ownership, and context accurately. Only once this is complete, Slack should then layer AI automation on top of it. And that's it for this video. I hope it gave you a clear and structured way to answer product improvement questions, which is one of the most popular product strategy questions that they can ask in interviews. In my next video, I'll cover another type of product strategy questions. So I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.